Good morning. Welcome to the fourth quarter. I have a twin sister, Alyssa. And when we were born, she was born first, so they put her in the bassinet, and they put a card that said A Lange in her bassinet. I think that's what you call it. I don't know, the crib. I was B Lange. Worked out because she became Alyssa Lange, I became Brian Lange. Now fast forward 28 years forward to today. My sister is in banking. She has a big banking job. She's an impressive professional. She's very analytical, really good with numbers, so when people put together deals, she reviews all of the data, and then she writes an analysis. And she writes an analysis that is clear, concise, and just spot on. Practically riveting reading, but not quite. That makes her in demand, so the people at her bank are always wanting her to do the analysis for their deals. Well, her bank is sort of, has had some public challenges, and it's been tough for the employees. So my sister got to the point where she felt overworked and under-resourced. And that was a challenging situation. Lo and behold, a recruiter calls. Recruiter offers more money. And then my sister was captured with the idea of a different environment. It was somehow going to be better. So she became one of the 47 million people who quit last year. They call this the Great Resignation. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of the data. What's really astounding is that 4 million people per month were quitting last year. It's the highest quit rate on record. Another interesting aspect is we lost 1.9% of people 55 and older. So if you think about all that experience that walked out the door, that's tough for organizations to kind of keep going. U.S. labor statistics bear this out. 47 million people quit their jobs. It's kind of a misnomer that it's called the Great Resignation. Another word for it is actually the Great Aspiration. And we think of the Great Resignation as being pandemic-driven, but actually what they say is that it was pandemic-exacerbated, that pushed it forward a little bit, but it was really continuing kind of a long-term trend. Another interesting aspect of this, 1 out of 3 women are considering leaving the workforce, switching jobs, or cutting their work hours. So people are quitting, right? It's you're seeing it at your companies, you're losing good people, you're probably getting calls from recruiters with descriptions of a better life on the other side. If you remember several years ago, Buckingham and Kaufman wrote a book called First Break All the Rules. And one of the really big ideas that came out of that book was that people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. Now, I think that came in at an important time. It really helped us refocus our efforts on developing managers and helping them understand their role. However, I feel today, I think we have to be careful about letting companies off the hook. You know, my sister left a bad bank. Unfortunately, she traded it for another crappy bank. So they're slow, they're bureaucratic, and again, she's in a situation where she currently feels overworked and under-resourced. You know, so this fact of people leaving, we're having to focus on, well, how do we keep the folks that we want to keep? And then how do we attract people into our organizations? But here's the thing. You can only write a check so big. And you can only offer so many 5-day work-at-home, opportunities to people. So at some point, we realize, well, what can we do to attract people and retain the ones that we want to keep? And so perhaps it's time for us to embrace culture as a competitive advantage, to make it such that, and I like asking managers this when I work with them, I'm like, by a show of hands, raise your hand if you feel that if the 6 or 8 people on your team were offered X amount of dollars more a year to go work for another company. Raise your hand if you feel confident that your people would stay. Yeah, that's a little scary, right? So, but it shouldn't be that way. I mean, I like to think of it as, I would hope that my folks would think about, I have opportunities to develop. I'm heard. I care about the work that we're doing. And so, therefore, if they're engaged, that they would say, you know what? Yeah, that's a little bit more money. It's not life-changing money. And that's the thing. Most of us, you're going to do a little bit better, but it's really not life-changing. So this is where you want your culture to be something that becomes part of that decision-making, process. Now, culture sometimes is this mystical, omnipresent concept of culture. So we can take a look at a couple of quotes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. Culture guides discretionary behavior, and it picks up where the employee handbook leaves off. Discretionary effort. We talked about this in one of the breakout sessions yesterday of what that is, and that can actually be a way of describing an engaged employee, someone who's willing to apply discretionary effort. And then the employee handbook, the manual, HR likes to think every possible outcome is defined in there, right? And what you learn is that's not always the case. I'm reminded of the movie A Few Good Men, where they have the Marine on the trial, on the stand, and they're talking about the mess hall, like breakfast. And Tom Cruise comes over and says, hey, can you show me in the manual where the instructions are for the mess hall? And the young Marine says, no, sir, I don't think it's in there. And Tom Cruise says, are you telling me that we don't serve our Marines? He said, oh, no, 3 squares a day, sir. He said, but if it's not in the manual, how did you figure out where to eat? He said, I don't know, I guess I just followed everybody to the mess hall at chow time. And that's the aspect of culture that I find the most interesting. You can't necessarily plan for every aspect and define what it looks like. There are certain discretionary or casual things about a culture that are present. I'll share an example with you, another family example. My oldest brother, Cliff. Cliff went to work for a company years ago that had a really strong performance-driven culture. This was not a touchy-feely organization in any way, stretch of the imagination. So he's at this meeting, the CEO is there, these high-level people, and they turn to my brother. He's an actuary, so math geek, mathlete. And they said, Cliff, how come that product that we created didn't hit its targets? And my brother, again, like my sister, very analytical. He says, well, we had this thing happen, and then that thing happened, and then this other thing happened. And, he was giving a very rational explanation of why they didn't hit the numbers, the metrics. After the meeting, one of my brother's new colleagues pulled him aside and said, hey, Cliff, nobody cares. My brother said, well, what do you mean? He said, the excuses thing. We don't do that here. So what my brother learned from that conversation was, in future opportunities where he had to explain something, the proper answer at that organization was, it won't happen again, here's what we're doing to fix it. So you look at that and you step aside and you go, well, you could put that in a manual, but it's an example of a more casual interaction, but it absolutely speaks to the culture of the organization. The other thing about employee handbooks is related to onboarding. And here's another quote on this. Most companies overlook the most basic of all training functions, the onboarding of new employees into their corporate culture. And if you think about it, it's enough to try to get the ins and outs of how your company works. Your LMS system and your expense management system and the performance management systems and all. There's so much with just the business of doing business that it can seem like a luxury to pay attention to culture. But here's the thing. If a culture is well defined, it absolutely can shape behavior. And I joke with clients, half jokingly, with clients where I'll say, look, you can get your culture by accident, or you can be deliberate and decide what kind of place you want to be. And I think every single person in this room has the opportunity to contribute in meaningful ways to the nurturing and the development of your company's culture through your L&D role. And that's what I want to explore with you here today. Now this one, I love this quote too. Culture is like the wind. It's invisible, yet its effect can be seen and felt. And what, again, this sort of mystical idea, I don't think culture is mystical. I just think we have to think it through and figure out what it is we want at our, particular organizations. I'm sure that my sister's new bank has posters on the wall that talk about innovation and agility and integrity and all that. I know when I go into client companies, I will look at what's on the wall and I'll ask people like, hey, so is that what this place looks like? And sometimes people will be like, oh yeah, no, absolutely, that's us. But other times people look at it and they go, huh? Oh. Yeah, no. Or you have the sort of sad situation I had with one client where I was working with their whole management crew. I'm up at the chart pad, and I said, "Oh, so what are the values again? I think you have like five or six values. What are they?" What I heard was integrity, and then I hear like leadership. I'm like, okay. And we couldn't get through the list, and it was really sad. I put the marker down, and I said, "What does this like mean, if anything?" And they're like, "Oh, I guess we should know them." I'm like, yeah, they're there for a reason. And what you want to make sure is that it wasn't some consultant that came in and said, "This is what your culture should be." It's got to be a combination of interviewing your senior folks about what is that vision for the company and then trying to get clear on that. Let me share one example with you, just one, to show you what I mean about a company that takes its culture seriously and show you how they do that. So I spent most of my adult life in San Diego, or home of WD-40. I got to know Gary Ridge, the CEO of that company. And look at this quote. This is on their website. "We live, breathe, and play by our values every day." Does that sound wishy-washy? Hyperbole? Aspirational or declarative? This is a company that says, we are going to live by this. In fact, they took it a step further. They have something, I don't know how politically correct this is today, but they call it the Maniac Pledge. I am responsible for taking actions, asking questions, getting answers, and making decisions. I won't wait for someone to tell me. If I need to know, I'm responsible for asking. I have no right to be offended that I didn't get this sooner. If I'm doing something others should know about, I'm responsible for telling them. So let me ask a question. What sort of behaviors do you think you might see in this kind of environment, when it's sort of laid out like this? What might you expect to see the people in that company do? They're going to be accountable. They'll be self-motivated. They'll take initiative. What are behaviors, those ones that sort of chip away at productivity and engagement? What sort of those behaviors that can get in the way will you not likely see in that environment? Someone who says, "That's not my job." Waiting around. I can't move forward until I get the information I need. What do you want me to do? What's that? Oh, that's right, working in a silo. I hear this all. You ever hear like, oh, those people over in such and such, department. So this is just one simple example. Like, they lay it out. And the way I think about culture is when it's really well defined, you have a simple filter, and you're either okay with what you're seeing or you're not okay with what you're seeing. It either fits in that environment based on the culture you've said that you wanted, or it doesn't. And if you don't know, then that is an indication that that culture isn't as defined as it could be. One of my favorite descriptions or definitions of culture comes from a really great book, Unlock Behavior, Unleash Profits, making that connection between those two things. And she described corporate culture as a pervasive pattern of behaviors that are either reinforced or punished by the company's systems and or people over time. Now, let's break this down a little bit. Systems that are reinforced, you tell people this is what we want, and then your systems ideally are aligned with that to help produce that. You show them what's important. You show them what you value and what you want from them. Or punished, right? And maybe that's a strong word, but, like frowned upon. Like excuses at my brother's company were frowned upon. But you learn that, and it's the behaviors that you see, and as they are displayed over time, that's how an employee figures out whether this culture is like legit and real or if it's the posters on the wall. Notice that my brother, it was a person, a colleague, who pulled him aside to educate and teach him about that culture and said, hey, we don't do excuses here. Nobody cares. So that's an example of how the people can reinforce that culture. The other thing you want to look for is when what a company says is not congruent with what it does. Right? So there are plenty of companies that will say, we are a team, environment, and together we win more and all that good stuff, right? But then you look at their rewards system, and lo and behold, oh my gosh, it's all about the results, the individual results. Or a company says, hey, how we get results through our people, with our people, how we get those results matters. And you're like, oh, they're going to take good care of me. But then you look at, again, the reward system, and it's, nope, just the performance metrics, just the numbers. You either hit the numbers or you didn't. You're like, well, wait, that system is not reinforcing what you said about how work gets done matters, right? That's that tough manager that achieves results, but their people hate being a part of the company. When the companies allow that to continue, that's on the company, So if what you say is how we treat our people matters. Another example, one of our clients had people are our greatest assets, and we want them to be engaged, and we love our people. This is the same company that had the entire sales force dial in or sit by the phone on Monday after Thanksgiving to find out who was going to get laid off. And I'm thinking, maybe we could have done that on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Then 10% of people have a crappy Thanksgiving instead of all of them. So as a company makes decisions, another client, they slightly overpaid not of a salesperson. And this company was like, we want people to be engaged, feel a part of it. We're a family. They actually use that word, which I'm not a fan. I don't think we're family at work. They went back to her. They said, oh, hey, we made a mistake. You owe us. And they actually wanted her to pay it back. And then you look at, but you wanted engaged people. That's an opportunity where a company could say, that's on us. We screwed up. You keep it. And it was months later. I mean, that money was gone, So I think culture is also that thing that you want your people to step up to that line and then say, wait a second, is what we are proposing here, does this fit? Does this fit in our values? Does this align with what we tell everybody we're about? And it's just having that that sort of self-check that can help stay on track. So then the question becomes, so what can we do in this room from our perch in learning and development? I want to share 3 areas in which each person in this room can make an impact. The first thing we can do is make sure that the training that we deliver aligns and links towards those things that we say we believe in. So perhaps it's values, right? Here's an example. Let's say that one of our values is innovation. We want this to be a safe place for ideas. So then, in training, you're teaching listening, a workshop on listening skills. It's as simple as saying, hey, by the way, yeah, we're learning these skills, but do you know why? Because listening skills help us to support other people while they're trying to be innovative. And right? And then you're sitting there like, oh, okay, I see how that goes together. If you're teaching skills around how to raise an issue with a colleague, with a peer, all right, and you're teaching that, you step back and say, because remember, we talked about we want people to be accountable. And that's one of the ones, by the way, I want you to challenge yourself. Do the people in your company know if you say we're accountable or we want to be accountable, do they know what that means, what that looks like? Very often, we don't fill that in for people. And that's where a learning and development professional can make a big impact. We can say, we're learning this skill because we want you to be accountable. Well, one way to hold each other accountable is you have to have those tough conversations. So this is why we're teaching these skills. So you link that. You link it to the values and behaviors. Every training that is delivered has the potential to be connected or referenced to the values or behaviors that you have espoused for your people. Oh, this next one. I want to do a show of hands. Please raise your hand if your company specifically does some training for managers that teaches them about their role and their connection to nurturing the company's culture. Specific training that shows them. Okay, so I will tell you, from this view, it was a few people. That's a huge opportunity. I'm an organizational development nerd. I actually loved all that stuff in college and took as many of the organizational behavior and those kind of classes that I could. Because I've always been fascinated about how do a group of high-performing people come together and create a high-performing organization, right, that gets results. How does that happen? It's actually not that complicated, I think. I know we can make it more complicated. But one of the things is you talk to managers, they don't see that every coaching conversation has that potential to link to values as well. So when I'm coaching someone and I'm trying to help them get better, I said, that's because, remember, we talk about being patient first, and so the reason why and when you make those connections in those conversations. So it's about dialogue. Dialogue is how you make this happen. This is why the second part of this is the idea of stories. Stories within an organization are powerful. Think about my brother's example where he was pulled aside and said, hey, don't do the excuse thing. He, as a leader, when new people would join his team, he could say, by the way, let me share a story with you. Early on in my tenure here, I went to a meeting. I started to share all of this impressive analysis. And so by sharing that story, people can be like, oh, okay, I see what you mean by that. We had a situation actually at our company where when someone had joined, he had a follow-up meeting with a client, and I asked him afterwards, I'm like, hey, how did that meeting go? And he said, well, remember, he was new to the organization. He said, well, you may not like the outcome. And I said, oh, really? I said, okay, tell me more. He said, well, I didn't push having them do another workshop. It didn't seem like it was the right time to do that. And I said, wait a minute. Are you saying that you did what you felt was in the best interest of the client? He said, well, yeah. I said, let me tell you something. You are never going to get flack or pushback from me because you acted in the best interest of our clients. So That taught Doug that. But then, as other people join the organization, I can share the story like that. By the way, let me tell you the story. So stories are powerful. Anybody go to the story? I'm sure people did. There was the storytelling session this week, right? Can you give us one insight into why stories are so compelling? They're more memorable and real, right? It's not coming from that 3-ring binder. That's the old days. It's not coming from the internal website. All right, here's the third area. You want to ensure that the systems and metrics, the things that you track and pay attention to, align with your branding of what you say that you're about. Again, if you say you're team-focused, but all of your rewards are really based on individual performance, maybe that's an opportunity. If you say that how you get results, with your people matters, well, check and make sure that your managers are being assessed in some way around that, and that you're providing development for them. And here's the big one, everybody. This is where we can be accountable. It's our job to check our leaders on this when we need to, because they will not often see, I know we say this because it sounds like the right thing, but when you look at the back end of things, we really don't support that. That's an opportunity for us to raise that issue and to say, hey, these things aren't lining up together. So 3 categories right here. Making sure that when we're delivering training, we're linking it to what we say the company is about. We have another opportunity to train our managers specifically in how they nurture that culture. The stories, they should be talking about stories that include talking about their values, etc. They should be disseminating those. You can grab these stories, reach out to people, get those stories, and put them in your newsletters or your, web page where you're focusing on that kind of things. Disseminate those things. Make those stories become a part of the culture itself. And then that third area is just making sure everything lines up. The things that you say that you believe, do your systems back that up? So those are thoughts from the guy up on the stage. I know there's so much knowledge in this room. Would anybody care to share with us some tips or tangible ideas that you might have to share with the rest of us about how to nurture this culture through that L&D perspective? Anybody have any thoughts, ideas that you might like to share with us? Yes.
We have a leadership development program where we lean in on our senior leaders that have lived through all the challenges that our younger leaders that are currently in, and they share some examples and story tell about challenges that they've seen, how culture is really being defined and definitive in your culture makes a difference. Leadership, all those qualities.
So, what's your name, my friend? Shane? Shane is saying that they bring in senior leaders and to share their stories with people. You bring them into like new hire trainings or any opportunity you get.
So we have a leadership train that comes to the headquarters, and we also have what's called the Leadership Fireside that we do on either our monthly or quarterly cadence. We bring the senior leaders in, and it's kind of like it's an all-hands call. You can get on it if you want to, opportunity to ask questions, and be really our leaders. Talk about, they're here, they're the senior leaders, but they're just like us. They're human. They go through those same challenges. They overcome them. They take risks, and it's okay.
Thank you for that, Shane. Yeah, so bringing them in and sharing their stories, it sounds like they have the opportunity to show their humility. And I think that that's a powerful thing that probably contributes to the culture at your company, is that when these folks come in and they're willing to talk about their mistakes and their challenges, then they're seeing it in real life as an example versus reading it from a piece of paper or the poster on the wall. Thank you very much, Shane. We got time for one more, if we have one more person to share an idea with us on nurturing culture and what you do to make that happen. All right. Food for thought. That was my goal today. I wanted to give food for thought. I am big on culture and organizations delivering for their people and reflecting what they say they believe in the way they operate. So I wish you all the best in continuing that march forward, and thank you for being a part of the fourth quarter here. And we're about to learn some more ideas with our next speakers so we maximize that LinkedIn thing. So thank you very much.